A dramatic week for the Department of Justice. Already investigating one president, the Attorney General adds to the list. Again, looking into the treatment and possession of classified documents.
But under the regulations, the extraordinary circumstances here require the appointment of a special counsel for this matter.
The political and legal hoops the Department of Justice has to jump through. Rick Mullaney gives us his analysis. Florida's aging population continues to grow. A Jacksonville woman leading the state's efforts. We'll talk with Secretary of Elder Affairs, Michelle Branham. Plus, the plans move forward, a new location and brand new building for MOSH. The CEO joins us on This Week in Jacksonville. So glad you're with us today. The Commander-in-Chief handling highly sensitive documents inappropriately. That is, again, the question a special counsel will look into. Rick Mullaney is joining us now, an attorney, our News4Jax political analyst, the executive director of Jacksonville University's Public Policy Institute. Rick, a big, broad question. President Joe Biden now is being investigated here. What's this all about? Why is this important to look into?
This is about the handling of classified documents, and it's important because it involves national security issues and the potential commission of crimes. A little bit of context is helpful. Joe Biden left office in 2017. From then to now, 6 years, he's had these documents.
He left office as the vice president.
As the vice president, and he did not have the authority to take classified documents with him. By way of background, on November 2nd, classified documents were found at his office at the Penn Biden Center in D.C. At that time, the White House let the National Archives know. They came and got the documents, but they did not notify the Justice Department nor the FBI. But the Archives, National Archives did. The Justice Department began an investigation. On December 20th, they found additional documents at the Biden home. Not nearly as many as we're talking about with Donald Trump, but they're classified. And by the way, something we'll talk about, federal law is very strict on the handling of classified documents for good reason, because it's national security. And then this past week, another document found at his home, and therefore what you saw was the Attorney General appointed a special counsel. Before that, a U.S. attorney in Chicago had been looking at this, recommended the appointment of a special counsel. In the end, I don't believe the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, had any choice but to appoint a special counsel, given the circumstances and given the backdrop of another special counsel looking into Donald Trump.
Right. So lots of complexity to this, and lots of questions, I think, for most of us who are not involved in the judicial system, don't understand, not attorneys trained like you are. So let's start even there. Why would a U.S. attorney in Chicago be looking at what's happening in Delaware or in Washington, D.C.?
Well, what Merrick Garland did when he found out about this back in November, and by the way, one issue here is the timing.
Right.
How come this didn't go public the week before
the 2 months, almost, well, a month and a half anyway.
And before the midterms.
Yeah.
But Merrick Garland, it was a Trump appointee. The U.S. attorney for Chicago was a Trump appointee. He, again, I think the Attorney General is very concerned with the integrity and the reputation and the independence of the Justice Department, and that's one of the reasons why you have a special counsel. So we had a U.S. attorney out of Chicago do the initial investigation. They came up with more documents. That U.S. attorney, by the way, is heading for private practice and cannot be special counsel. So he then appointed Robert Hur, another Trump appointee. Again, the goal of the Attorney General is to try as best he can to diffuse the highly political nature of all of this and to try to restore some independence and credibility for the Justice Department.
Let's talk about the political nature of this. So the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, even though they're appointed by a president who may be this party or that party, they're supposed to be separate from the political machines. That's got to be really hard to do.
Really, really difficult, Kent. As we've talked about before, already in 2023, the Justice Department has some very hard decisions to make. Are they going to indict Donald Trump for what happened at his home and the classified documents? I would suggest that what's happened here makes it much, much harder for lots of reasons. Are they going to indict for the riot in D.C., the January 6th riots in Washington? That decision is also looming. Regardless, you're going to hear a cry, if he goes forward with the indictments, that it's political in nature. This discovery of the classified documents in possession of President Biden, after he had left office, I do believe makes that decision much more difficult.
So, yeah, and again, part of the political complexity is that there's this special counsel looking into President Trump and his handling of documents. Now President Biden. I do want to play a soundbite here, some sound from President Biden. He did respond. He had a chance to address the documents right away, and while speaking at another event, he fielded some questions. So this is his response to a reporter pointing out that the documents were found in a garage next to the president's sports car.
I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
So, Rick, I played that because initially there was a lot of condemnation sent towards President Biden about this. Oh, and he's talking about his Corvette. Does it matter, those details, or is that just, again, political fluff? Because what really is at issue is here, what were the documents? Did he have the authority to have them, and were they stored properly? Were they safe?
That last thing you just mentioned, it does matter, Kent. And the president then was asked, you mean the classified documents were in the garage? Yes, they were in the garage locked with his Corvette. I am sure the White House team winced at that response. That is not handling classified documents properly. President Biden does have a problem here. His defense is going to be inadvertence, but the standard here really is gross negligence or knowing misconduct. The federal statutes are very, very strict. Now, we are very early, by the way. We shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Who had access to these documents? How top secret were these documents? We know they were classified. There's been some speculation that involved Iran and China. Some have said that the president wrote a book on Iran and China and that maybe he used the documents for that purpose. If he did, clearly improper. And so there are a lot of unanswered questions that the special counsel is going to have to look into. Again, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but this really was an unforced error by the Biden administration, a political gift to Donald Trump, a political gift to the Republican Party.
So in the final minute or two, how is this different than what the special counsel is looking into with former President Trump?
There certainly are lots of differences. For example, and you certainly will hear the Biden team stress these differences, Donald Trump had many more documents, over 300. There are issues relating to transparency, potential obstruction when it comes to Donald Trump, and he certainly took them intentionally. However, he was president, and he did have the authority to declassify these documents. As vice president, there is no defense for Vice President Biden. He did not have the authority to take these documents. Statutes are clear on removal and retention. This was improper. His defense is going to be attempt at inadvertence, but does that rise to gross negligence? And so while you had more Trump documents and you have a potential obstruction, that shouldn't take away from the fact that this is very, very serious. It doesn't do Donald Trump any good to argue that Hillary Clinton was worse. It was 33,000 emails. She had classified documents. That's worse than mine. For all three of these, whether it's Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or Joe Biden, the handling of classified documents is very serious. And the allegation is, at the best, you can say is the mishandling of the documents. The worst you can say is federal criminal statutes were potentially violated.
Yeah, so this is the beginning, as you pointed out. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but we'll see how these issues play out. Rick Mullaney, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Jacksonville's Michelle Branham has a history in advocating for seniors, and she's now in a senior position in state government. You'll hear from her next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
Yeah, Jacksonville has influence in state government right now. Paul Renner, Cord Bird, and Jacksonville's Michelle Branham. She's been reappointed to her role as Secretary of Elder Affairs. I met with the Secretary in Tallahassee to learn more about what her agency is doing right now.
Well, the Department of Elder Affairs was incepted 30 years ago, so we just celebrated our 30th anniversary as a department. And really, it's about service to Floridians that are age 60 and above. So that with health and human services, with home and community-based services, with disaster preparedness, with abuse, neglect, and exploitation, help in long-term care, help in placement in long-term care. The Department of Elder Affairs is one of the smaller agencies, but we have a massive footprint. We have over 6 million Floridians that are age 60 and above. So the agency is approximately 500 people. And we service the entire state of Florida. We have offices, our CARES offices and our ombudsman's offices are all over the state.
Obviously, you just mentioned a lot of people in Florida who could use some guidance. What are the gaps in service and what kind of assistance? What do they need to know?
I think that the aging network can be extremely complicated. In fact, I know it can be because we're living into it. So I think one of the priorities became how do we get direct to service? So what is a one-stop shop for us? So we have our helpline, which I think is really, really helpful, and our website to be a little bit more user-friendly. I think those things alone will be very helpful. But also to work with our partners, our area agencies on aging, and our providers to create a direct path to seniors so we're not living into this wish I would have known about that service sooner.
So I wish I would have known sooner. You're hearing that from people?
Yes, and I think Florida has so much to offer, especially we are the state with so many seniors. There are so many services and providers and partners out there to help. But if we're not getting that message out there, if we're not making the path easy, I think sometimes, like I said, the aging network can be a little bit complicated. So we just need to make sure there's a direct path and it's easy to use and everybody knows how to use it.
What's your view on what's happened over the last 3 years? The pandemic created a crisis, and even the idea of you have to evacuate differently or not evacuate because of people's age. It's a little different for people when they're older than younger.
I think we learned a lot about isolation and loneliness and what that can do to a person. And I think we're doing a lot here in Florida to mitigate that. I got to work on several pilot programs, and the governor has been so supportive of some of those programs about isolation and loneliness and what we're doing to mitigate the consequences of that. So I think we learned a lot about that during the pandemic. I think we learned a lot about the aging in general and how that might be different about how we evacuate, whether or not we evacuate, what our disaster plan looks like compared to maybe a younger family, and what we can do to make sure that older Floridians are prepared. I think that's going to be ultimately important, and maybe we provide a different level of customer service there for those age 60 or 70 or 80 and above, and what that looks like, because there are some physical limitations sometimes to evacuating or planning or preparing.
I know your background with Alzheimer's disease and care, advocating for research and care there. How does that impact what happens in the Department of Elder Affairs?
Florida has the second highest prevalence for Alzheimer's in the country. So, you know, my background with the Alzheimer's Association, it's a situation that stays very close to my heart because it affects 590,000 Floridians. And I think ultimately I'd like to see Florida be first out for some of the treatments and possibilities and cure, and I believe we've set a really good infrastructure for that. So I have a lot of passion for that because I believe Florida is heavily impacted, not just in a human element, but also the financial burden that that disease has, because it can can last for 10, 15 years. But I've learned my calling is really for the vulnerable, and even beyond the vulnerable, just seniors in general, and the vibrancy that we should expect as we age. I wanted to be a place, and I know Florida is, and I love living here, where we can really enjoy our aging years and find great vibrancy and activity as we age. I think that's ultimately important, that we have a really good future to look forward to.
I know you're familiar with Mary Daniel from Jacksonville. We interviewed her recently. She was so focused on trying to bring her concerns to the attention of the governor and help make changes happen. Do you think that she has laid out a path where people can be activated citizens and get things that they feel are concerns changed?
I think Mary definitely put a call out there and showcased what can happen with isolation and loneliness, and what we were doing in long-term care communities that wasn't working, and raising that level of awareness. I've gotten to sit down with Mary several times, and she is a tireless fighter for that. And I appreciate putting that at the forefront, because I believe isolation and loneliness, an article just came out in Fortune magazine about the level of impact, both physically and mentally, that it has not just on our seniors, but all of us in general, and what that toll can take. So I think raising awareness about what we need to do to mitigate that loneliness and isolation is key, and I think Mary was a voice for that.
What's your connection to what the First Lady created with the Hope Florida initiative?
Well, the First Lady started the Hope Florida initiative with the Department of Children and Families, and then extended it to the Department of Elder Affairs, which I was so grateful for. So now we have the Hope Florida initiative as a pathway to purpose, and that's really seniors helping seniors. So we took our big volunteer recruitment effort and our big volunteer base of seniors, and now we're out there being deployed helping seniors, providing companionship and services and assistance to other seniors. And that became ever more prevalent when Hurricane Ian hit. So we deployed 64 seniors out there helping other seniors during the hurricane. So it was such a significant program, and it's expanded now to 250 volunteers. So I'm so grateful the First Lady chose us to be partnering with her on that, because it was such an exciting, engaging time. And then to see the efforts of that after Hurricane Ian was really significant.
We spoke briefly about Alzheimer's earlier, but there's an Alzheimer's Center for Excellence. Is that right?
Yes, so back in May, the governor did a press conference in Broward County. We launched the Florida Alzheimer's Center of Excellence. That's the only one in the country that is really born out of the State Unit on Aging. So out of the Department of Elder Affairs, we launched a Center of Excellence to not just combat some of the resources and issues that come up when you're living with Alzheimer's disease, but also for the caregiver as well. So it's a really dual experience for the caregiver and the person living with the disease. So we've been working closely with some of the funding from the Alzheimer's Disease Initiative and some of our work with a grant that was provided by ACL. So it's a very exciting venture for us to be out there. So now we're in phase 2 of that implementation, where we're going to work with other partners, health systems and universities for many centers of excellence so we can keep expanding the effort.
And stay with us. There are changes on the way for the Museum of Science and History in Jacksonville. The MOSH CEO is with us next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Private, nonprofit, and the city of Jacksonville's most visited museum, MOSH, has been on the South Bank for ages, but is working toward a new North Bank address. Joining us this morning, Bruce Fafard, the CEO of MOSH. And Bruce, so MOSH has been in that same location, I looked it up, since 1969, still then known as the Jacksonville Children's Museum. So you've been in this position of your own as the CEO of MOSH for almost exactly a year. Tell me about what's happening now, because this is a time of change, growth, probably pretty exciting time for MOSH as well.
It's a very exciting time for us as we continue to move forward to moving to the North Bank. Just recently, we received site plan approval from the Downtown Investment Authority. The next step for us is to have the legislation filed with City Council, which we expect to happen in the next 30 to 60 days. We are in the middle of our fundraising, and we hope to break ground by the end of 2024. Opening a brand new museum for our city at the end of 2026. So we're very excited about the momentum we have.
Let's show you some of the images here that you guys have got here from, I guess, the exterior, and then what the interior is going to look like. Putting together these plans. You were Chief Operating Officer before CEO. So this doesn't happen just overnight. This has been part of a process, right?
It has been part of in fact, the process started back in 2013. So it has been well thought out. We've engaged a number of community groups and individuals to help plan. We have world-class architect and exhibit designers on our team, and they have done an outstanding job with designing and visioning the new museum.
You mentioned that DIA approval, and then there's legislation that goes to City Council. So what's next in the process for you guys? You mentioned fundraising also, right? That's
our main focus right now, and will be for the rest of this year into next year, is just honing in on raising the funds that we need. The total projects is going to be approximately $100 million. And so far to date in private funds, we've raised $14 million, and that's in the middle of a pandemic. Right. So we're emerging from that with a lot of momentum. So let's talk about what's happening right now. Obviously, the future is exciting, but the near-term future, I saw the excitement in your eyes a moment ago when we were talking about what's happening. About some of the upcoming exhibits, including Planet Pioneers. This is opening really soon. It is. In fact, next weekend we'll be opening Planet Pioneers, as you mentioned. We're so excited about that. It is a very interactive exhibit, 17 stations where you actually have to build a spaceship and a shuttle to be able to survive on Mars. So it takes you from here on Earth all the way to Mars. Very, very excited. Have you done this already, Bruce? No, but I'm going to be, I will be doing it. You and I will be first in line right there. So it sounds exciting and has to generate some imagination among the people who are there to see it, right? Without question. And what's wonderful about this exhibit is it's hands-on. So kids and adults of all ages get to actually interact and go through this exhibit. All right, so a couple other things. We've got about 2 minutes left here, and I don't want to miss anything. This exhibit, the Planet Pioneers, how long is that there? Do people have to rush out the first weekend, or it'll be there for a little bit? No, it'll be there for approximately 2.5 months, and so there's plenty time to come on in. We're open
Yeah, just next weekend, right?
Next weekend, that's right. Next weekend, come on down on Saturday and Sunday. We'd love to host you. We also have a number of other things that are going on. We run cosmic concerts in our planetarium. We have our naturalist center where you can come in and take a look at some of the animals that we have from Northeast Florida and just have a great family time.
So before we get farther away from that planetarium thing, so I read the Planetarium Night Live is the Honeycomb Telescope. What is this about? This is coming up in February, right?
It's coming up in February on the 17th. And basically, we have a lot of semi-professional astronomers in our area that contribute information, and you can come and interact with them. Very exciting time.
Yeah, final 30 seconds. What about February 24th? I'm reading this about Power, a showcase of arts, culture, history with the Melanin Market.
That is correct. It is going to be a wonderful showcase to demonstrate the interaction of these different things between arts and culture and history, which is what we're all about.
This is really cool. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We will be watching for what happens in that transition to the North Bank as well. Bruce Buffard from MOSH. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So as we move on, qualifying is now wrapped up for the March unitary elections in Jacksonville. We'll work on bringing you the candidates you want to hear from in the mayor's race, plus the city council member who steps out of the race, pointing at the controversial district lines. This Week in Jacksonville is each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Kent Justice, so thanks for watching on air, Channel 4, the CW17. You can find us online at news4jax.com or streaming on News4Jax Plus. And finally, if you're only joining us Sundays for This Week in Jacksonville, you're missing out. Be sure to subscribe to my weekly Twidge newsletter.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.